The wind, a bitter harbinger of winter, howled through the concrete canyons of the city, but beneath the hulking overpass of I-95, it was merely a mournful sigh. Sarah Jenkins, her breath pluming in the frigid air, carefully pushed open the lid of a cooler. Inside, nestled amongst ice packs, were vials of flu vaccine, each representing a tiny shield against the coming cold. It was 7 p.m., well past her shift at Street, Jude's, and she was technically off duty. But for Sarah, care didn't clock out. Tonight, her makeshift clinic was a stretch of cardboard flattened against a graffiti-scarred pillar. Her patients were the invisible, the forgotten, the ones the city pretended didn't exist until they became a statistic. "All right, folks," she announced softly, her voice carrying a warmth that belied the biting air. "Who's next for their flu shot? It's going to be a nasty one this year, meteorologists are saying." A few figures huddled in threadbare blankets stirred. Most knew Sarah. She was the one who didn't just hand out sandwiches, but dignity. She looked them in the eye, remembered their names, and spoke to them not as problems, but as people. Tonight, her focus was on George. His cough had been worsening over the last few weeks, a wet, rattling sound that always made her heart clench. He was an old veteran, his face a roadmap of hard living, his eyes holding the haunted echo of distant wars. "Nurse Sarah," George rasped, pulling himself upright with a wince, his voice gravelly. "You're a godsend, you know that?" Sarah knelt beside him, producing an alcohol wipe and a fresh syringe. "Just doing my job, George. And you're just getting what you deserve, a fighting chance against this crud." She administered the shot with practiced ease, her touch gentle. "Keep that arm still, and try to stay warm, okay? I'll be back next week with some more blankets." George nodded, a glimmer of gratitude in his weary eyes. It was a small act, but in this shadowed world it was monumental. It was hope. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just a nurse. She was a quiet rebel, a healer fueled by a past wound that never truly closed. Her younger brother, David, had been a vibrant, creative soul. But life had been cruel, delivering a series of blows that stripped him of his job, his home, and eventually, his hope. He'd ended up on the streets of Philadelphia, just a few miles from where Sarah now sat her day. She remembered the frantic phone calls, the desperate search, the cold dread that settled in her stomach when weeks turned into months. The official cause of death on his certificate had been pneumonia, but Sarah knew better. It was neglect, a system that had deemed him unworthy of warmth, food, and basic medical care. It was the same system she now worked within, and at times, against. The hospital she worked for, St. Jude's Medical Center, was a gleaming beacon of modern medicine, all polished chrome and hushed efficiency. It prided itself on its charitable foundation, its community outreach programs, all carefully curated and meticulously documented for tax purposes. But the raw, unfiltered need that existed just blocks from its doors was rarely met with the same enthusiasm. Sarah often saw homeless patients trickle in, only to be stabilized and then discharged back to the streets, the cycle destined to repeat. The paperwork was too complex, the follow-ups impossible, the liability too great. So, Sarah took matters into her own hands. She'd quietly requisition expiring flu shots, vials that would otherwise be discarded due to nearing their expiration date, and administer them herself, ensuring they were still perfectly viable. It was a calculated risk, one she'd been taking for months. As she packed up her cooler, the last of the shots given, a pang of unease shot through her. A sleek black sedan had slowed down a few hundred feet from the overpass, its tinted windows making it impossible to see inside. It idled for a moment, then slowly drove past, the passenger window rolling down just enough for a flash of a phone camera. Sarah dismissed it as a curious passerby, perhaps taking a photo of the dramatic city skyline. She couldn't have known that the man behind the lens was Mark Peterson, a junior administrator from St. Jude's, ambitious and ruthlessly dedicated to protocol. He wasn't admiring the skyline, he was documenting a perceived transgression. To him, Sarah wasn't a hero. She was a loose cannon, a potential liability to be neutralized. The next morning, the sterile scent of antiseptic usually brought Sarah a sense of calm purpose. Not today. A cold dread seeped into her bones as she entered the busy ward. Her colleagues averted their eyes, whispering behind cupped hands. Then, Nurse Thompson, her usually cheerful friend, approached with a grim face. "Sarah, mister. Davies needs to see you in his office. Immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Sarah's stomach churned. The game was up. She had known this day might come, but the reality of it felt like a punch to the gut. She took a deep breath, straightened her scrubs, and walked towards the administrative wing, towards the inevitable. The metallic taste of fear was sharp on her tongue. The silence in Mr. Davies' office was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of his pen against a polished mahogany desk. Mr. Davies' nidus. Davies, a man whose tailored suit seemed to be ironed directly onto his unyielding frame, gestured vaguely to the chair opposite him, without making eye contact. He was the epitome of corporate efficiency, all sharp angles and colder calculations. "Nurse Jenkins," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Thank you for coming." It wasn't a thank you, it was a prelude to an execution. Sarah sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had prepared herself for this, rehearsed her explanations, her justifications. She was ready to speak of human dignity, of the Hippocratic Oath, of common decency. But Mr. Davies, it quickly became clear, spoke a different language entirely. He laid out a series of glossy photographs on his desk. Images of her, under the overpass, a cooler at her feet, a syringe in her hand. The visual evidence was damning, stripped of context, devoid of the human stories she was trying to save. "These images," he stated, his gaze finally meeting hers, "depict a serious breach of St. Jude's Medical Center protocols. Unauthorized distribution of hospital assets, administration of medication outside of a controlled, sterile environment, and gross negligence regarding patient consent and follow-up care." Each word was a calculated blow. He spoke of unmitigated liability, reputational risk, and violation of professional conduct. Sarah tried to interject, "Mr. Davies, these were expiring vaccines, otherwise destined for disposal. And the people I was helping—" He cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Irrelevant emotional reasoning, Nurse Jenkins. We are a medical institution, not a street clinic. Our procedures are in place for a reason, to protect our patients and, might I add, our staff from legal repercussions." His eyes, cold and unyielding, fixed on her. "Do you understand the magnitude of the risk you've exposed this institution to? A single adverse reaction, a misplaced needle, and St. Jude's could face a multi-million-dollar lawsuit." Just then, the door opened and Dr. Morgan entered, his face a mask of stern disapproval. Dr. Morgan, head of Sarah's department, was a man who believed implicitly in the hierarchy of medicine. Nurses followed orders, doctors gave them. He saw Sarah's actions not just as a violation of rules, but as a challenge to his authority, an insubordination that could not be tolerated. He took a seat next to Mr. Davies, a silent ally in the bureaucratic inquisition. "Dr. Morgan," Mr. Davies nodded, "perhaps you can enlighten Nurse Jenkins on the professional ramifications of her actions." Dr. Morgan turned to Sarah, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. Sarah, what were you thinking? You're a nurse, not a one-woman public health initiative. You overstepped your bounds, dangerously so, administering vaccinations on the street, without proper patient assessment, without a clean environment, without documented consent. This isn't just unprofessional, it's reckless. It reflects poorly on our entire department." He leaned forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "Have you forgotten your training, Nurse Jenkins? Do you think the rules don't apply to you simply because you feel you're doing good?" Sarah's face flushed with anger, a hot wave rising from her chest. "Dr. Morgan, with all due respect, these are people who would never step foot in this hospital, who can't afford a clinic visit, who are dying of preventable illnesses on our streets. What about our oath to do no harm? What about compassion?" Dr. Morgan scoffed. "Compassion is admirable, Sarah, within the proper channels. This is not compassion. This is misguided zealotry. It's dangerous. You're a nurse. Your job is to assist, not to diagnose, not to treat independently. You risked your license, our hospital's reputation, and frankly, the health of those individuals by operating without supervision." The words felt like a betrayal, a twisting of the very principles he claimed to uphold. His dismissal of her actions as mere zealotry stung more than any accusation of rule-breaking. Mr. Davies then delivered the final, crushing blow. "Nurse Jenkins, effective immediately, your employment with St. Jude's Medical Center is terminated." Sarah stared, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Terminated. Just like that, for trying to save lives. "Furthermore," Mr. Davies continued, his voice monotone, "due to the severity of your actions and the potential for professional misconduct, We will be notifying the State Board of Nursing. Your license will be subject to review. Her license. The very essence of her identity. Her life's purpose. They weren't just taking her job. They were trying to take away her ability to heal, to help, to be a nurse at all. Before Sarah could fully process the words, the door to Mr. Davies' office opened again. This time, two uniformed police officers stood in the doorway. Their presence was a deliberate act of public humiliation, a clear message to any who might dare to defy the system. One officer, a burly man with a stoic expression, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "we just need you to collect your personal items, and we'll escort you from the premises." Sarah felt a searing heat on her cheeks. Her colleagues, alerted by the commotion, peered from the ward entrance, their faces a mix of pity, shock, and thinly veiled judgment. Mrs. Albright, a kind-hearted CNA who had always admired Sarah's dedication, looked at her with wide, sorrowful eyes, a silent apology in her gaze. Others, particularly those who adhered strictly to protocol, offered glares of righteous indignation. Dr. Morgan watched with a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk. As she was led down the hall, the officers flanking her like a common criminal, Sarah's mind reeled. The injustice was so raw, so profound. She had dedicated her life to caring, to healing, to putting human need before paperwork, and for that, she was being paraded out of the hospital like a pariah. The institution that preached health and wellness had just summarily discarded a dedicated caregiver for the simple act of extending that care to those who needed it most. The metallic taste in her mouth was no longer just fear. It was bitter, incandescent rage. She was publicly shamed, stripped of her professional identity, and all for choosing compassion over corporate convenience. The betrayal burned. The days that followed Sarah's public expulsion from Street Jude's bled into a suffocating blur. The city, once her vibrant workplace, now felt like a cold, unforgiving labyrinth. She spent hours in front of her laptop, the screen a cruel mirror reflecting her diminishing hope. Each job application was met with polite rejections, or worse, silence. The story of her firing, disseminated by Street Judes to potential employers under the guise of due diligence, preceded her like a dark cloud. Unauthorized conduct, liability risk, disciplinary action, the sterile corporate jargon, now applied to her, was a professional death sentence. Her nursing license, the emblem of her dedication and expertise, was under active review by the State Board. The letter had arrived, formal and chilling, outlining the charges leveled by Street Judes. She was scheduled for a hearing, a bureaucratic tribunal that felt rigged against her before it even began. Without a job, without an income, the weight of her mortgage and bills pressed down on her, a physical ache in her chest. She had savings, but they dwindled with alarming speed. Each grocery trip, each utility bill, was a reminder of her precarious position. One particularly gray, drizzling afternoon, Sarah found herself driving aimlessly. Her car, once a symbol of independence, now felt like a cage. Unconsciously, she steered towards the familiar path, the route to the overpass. She parked a safe distance away, pulling her hood low over her head, and simply watched. The encampment was still there, a cluster of makeshift shelters against the indifferent concrete. She saw George, the veteran, his familiar frame now more hunched, his cough sounding harsher even from this distance. A fresh wave of despair washed over her. It wasn't just the loss of her job or the threat to her license. It was the crushing realization that her actions, meant to help, had ultimately rendered her powerless to continue. She had wanted to be a shield, and now she was just another casualty. The flu season was in full swing, and she knew the statistics. Her patients, her people, were out there, vulnerable, and she could do nothing. The thought was a torment. She remembered the feel of the syringe in her hand, the quick, clean prick, the whispered thanks. She remembered David, his feverish brow, his labored breathing. She remembered the doctors at the emergency room, efficient but detached, telling her they'd done all they could. She had stood there, helpless, as his life slipped away, cursing a system that had let him fall through the cracks. Now, she was once again helpless, looking at a similar scene playing out, unable to intervene. The injustice of it all burned like a caustic acid. She had tried to patch the holes in a broken system, to provide care where there was none, and in return, the system had chewed her up and spat her out. Her sacrifice, the risk she had taken, felt utterly meaningless. She had failed, not in her intention, not in her compassion, but in her ability to change anything. She was just one person, pitted against an unfeeling, monolithic institution, and she had lost. The chill in the air seeped into her bones, mirroring the icy grip of despondency around her heart. She wasn't just unemployed, she was professionally exiled, stripped of her purpose. It was rock bottom, a lonely, desolate place where hope felt like a cruel mirage. The stale coffee in the newsroom of the City Pulse was perpetually lukewarm, much like the general enthusiasm of its overworked staff. But for Maya Sharma, a cub reporter whose idealism had yet to be fully crushed by low pay and endless deadlines, there was always a story waiting to be uncovered. Her eyes, usually scanning police blotters for sensational headlines, lit up when a tip came in from an anonymous source, a sympathetic orderly from Street Jude's. The orderly, disgusted by what he'd witnessed, detailed the public firing of a nurse for the inexplicable crime of caring too much. Maya, smelling a human interest piece with potential for outrage, tracked Sarah down. Their first meeting was cautious, Sarah wary of another blow, Maya eager to hear her side. Over countless cups of lukewarm coffee at a greasy diner, Sarah recounted everything. The silent pleas of George and countless others, the bureaucratic coldness of Mr. Davies, the condescension of Dr. Morgan, the shame of being escorted out by police. Maya listened, her reporter's instinct confirming what her heart already knew. This was a story that wouldn't just inform, but ignite. Maya's article, "Fired for Kindness, Local Nurse Punished for Aiding the Homeless," hit the City Pulse blog on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't the kind of sensational headline that immediately went viral, but it was written with a raw, earnest anger that resonated. She painted a vivid picture of Sarah's selfless acts, juxtaposing them against the cold corporate machinations of Street Jude's. She didn't hold back, detailing the public humiliation and the threat to Sarah's license. The initial reception was lukewarm, a few shares, a smattering of comments. Then, a local community advocacy group, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, stumbled upon it. They shared it on their Facebook page, captioning it with a furious, "This is what happens when compassion meets corporate greed." The post exploded. Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times, then thousands. The comments section became a firestorm. "Shame on Street Jude's! Nurse Sarah is a hero! This is disgusting." The story was picked up by larger local news aggregators, then by regional outlets. National nursing forums buzzed with indignation. Sarah's face, once synonymous with shame, was now a symbol of principled defiance. Mr. Davies and Dr. Morgan, once untouchable figures of authority, found themselves the subject of public scorn. Street Jude's social media pages were flooded with angry comments, forcing them to temporarily disable their comment section. Calls poured into their public relations department. The hospital, once a beacon of medical excellence, was now being branded as heartless. For Sarah, the outpouring of support was a strange, overwhelming experience. Messages of solidarity arrived from strangers, letters from retired nurses, small donations from concerned citizens. It was a lifeline she hadn't dared to hope for. The story eventually landed on the antique mahogany desk of Arthur Sterling, a name whispered with reverence in philanthropic circles. Sterling was a recluse, an octogenarian tech mogul who had made his fortune in the nascent days of Silicon Valley and then retreated to a quiet life of managing his vast foundation. He abhorred public displays of wealth, preferring to make impact through quiet, strategic investments in grassroots initiatives. He'd seen countless proposals for grand, splashy projects, but it was Maya's raw, heartfelt article about Nurse Sarah that truly caught his attention. He saw in Sarah not just a victim, but a force, a genuine, unpretentious spirit of giving. He dispatched his chief of staff, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Hayes, to arrange a meeting. Sarah, still reeling from the whirlwind of public attention, was skeptical but agreed. The meeting took place not in a gilded office, but in a modest, art-filled study in Sterling's historic townhouse. Arthur Sterling was not the imposing billionaire she might have imagined. He was a slight, soft-spoken man with kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened intently as Sarah spoke, not interrupting, occasionally offering a gentle nod. He asked probing questions, not about the medical specifics, but about her motivations, her philosophy of care, her vision for what true healthcare should be. He didn't just hear her words. He understood her heart. He saw the same unwavering dedication he had poured into his own ventures, the same belief in making a tangible difference. As the meeting drew to a close, a comfortable silence settled between them. Sterling leaned forward, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Nurse Jenkins," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Street?" Jude saw a liability. "I see an investment in humanity." Sarah held her breath, not daring to hope. "My foundation," he continued, "will fund a clinic for you. You will run it, your way. No bureaucracy, just care. A place where you can extend your compassion without fear of reprimand." The words hung in the air, a bridge over the chasm of her despair. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, hot and overwhelming. It wasn't just an offer, it was a vindication, a second chance, a quiet revolution disguised as a generous proposal. She had gone from being fired and shamed to being offered the keys to her own domain of healing. It was surreal, unbelievable, and profoundly, beautifully real. The initial euphoria of Arthur Sterling's offer was intoxicating. Sarah, with Evelyn Hayes, Sterling's formidable chief of staff, by her side, moved with renewed purpose. They found a defunct storefront in a mixed-income neighborhood, a place that had once been a small, independent hardware store. It was grimy, neglected, but Sarah saw potential: a high ceiling, good natural light, and a central location accessible to many who needed it most. Sterling's legal team swiftly acquired the property, and his architects began drafting plans for the Jenkins Initiative, a free, compassionate clinic. The dream, once a distant, agonizing memory, was now a tangible blueprint. The early days were a whirlwind of activity. Volunteers, inspired by Sarah's story, flocked to help paint, clean, and organize. Local businesses, hearing of Sterling's involvement, offered discounts on supplies. The community buzz was overwhelmingly positive, a sense of collective excitement about a new, much-needed resource. Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months, the heavy cloak of despair replaced by the vibrant fabric of hope. But not everyone shared in the enthusiasm. The news of a free clinic for the homeless eventually reached the pristine ears of Brenda Vance, the immaculately coiffed president of the local business association. Brenda was a woman who championed community values, which, in her lexicon, often translated to keeping undesirable elements out. She owned a chic boutique a few blocks from the new clinic site, and her carefully curated world was about to be disrupted. Brenda organized an emergency meeting of the business association, billing it as a discussion on community safety and economic development. Sarah, accompanied by Evelyn Hayes, attended. The room was packed with small business owners, some genuinely concerned, others simply easily swayed by Brenda's smooth rhetoric. Brenda, with a practiced, benevolent smile, began her address. "Now, we all want to help, of course," she purred, her voice dripping with insincere empathy. "We are a compassionate community, but we must also consider the practical implications. A clinic catering to certain populations could attract an undesirable element. Property values, foot traffic for our businesses, the safety of our children walking to school." She never explicitly said homeless or addicts, but the message was clear, delivered through a web of coded language designed to stoke fear and prejudice. "We need to protect our investments, ladies and gentlemen, and we need to ensure our neighborhood remains a vibrant, family-friendly area, not a magnet for transient individuals." Her words were a chilling echo of Mr. Davies' detached corporate jargon, only wrapped in a thinly veiled veneer of community concern. The injustice of it all, the polite bigotry, made Sarah's blood boil. "Miss Vance," Sarah interjected, her voice firm despite the tremor of anger, "these are not elements. These are human beings. They are our neighbors, our veterans, our mothers and fathers who have fallen on hard times. They deserve care, not condemnation." Brenda merely smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Oh, Nurse Jenkins, I admire your passion. But passion doesn't pay the bills. And it certainly doesn't prevent loitering, panhandling, or other issues that could drive away our valued customers." The meeting devolved into a heated debate. While some, like a kindly diner owner, spoke up in support of the clinic, the majority of the room seemed to sway towards Brenda's narrative of fear. The battle wasn't just for a clinic, it was for the very soul of the neighborhood. The antagonism quickly moved beyond rhetoric. Suddenly, the city planning department found unforeseen complexities in the clinic's permit applications. Fire inspections were delayed, building codes were interpreted with an almost malicious strictness, and historical preservation committees raised concerns about the aesthetic impact of the clinic's signage. Evelyn Hayes, with her sharp legal mind, immediately recognized the coordinated effort. "This is Brenda Vance, orchestrating this behind the scenes," she informed Sarah, frustration evident in her voice. She has friends in high places. Sarah also found herself confronting local authorities once again. A police captain, Captain Miller, requested a meeting. He was a pragmatic man, ostensibly sympathetic to Sarah's cause. "Nurse Jenkins," he began, settling across from her in his office. "I understand your mission, but I also have a duty to maintain public order. If your clinic becomes a hub for activities that concern the community, my hands will be tied. Any reports of loitering, public intoxication, or vagrancy around your establishment, and I'll have no choice but to deploy additional patrols. And those patrols will inevitably lead to arrests." It wasn't a threat, but a thinly veiled warning, a subtle form of institutional obstruction. The message was clear: help the homeless, but if they inconvenience anyone, you'll pay the price. The constant pushback was exhausting. Sarah spent evenings attending town hall meetings, facing down hostile questions and thinly veiled insults. She used every opportunity to humanize the people she served, sharing stories of individuals like George, the veteran, who, thanks to a few simple shots, was now healthier and beginning to find stability. She appealed to empathy, to shared humanity, to the idea that a community's strength was measured by how it treated its most vulnerable. She knew this was a different kind of fight than the one against street Jude's, more insidious, more entrenched in the quiet prejudices of everyday life. But she also knew that if she could win over even a few skeptical hearts, if she could just open those doors, she could truly begin to heal. The rage against the system had found a new, more subtle target, and Sarah was determined to stand her ground. The grand opening of the Jenkins Initiative was not a flashy affair, devoid of ribbon cuttings and pompous speeches. Instead, it was marked by a quiet, determined hum of activity. After weeks of battling zoning boards, appeasing historical preservation committees, and navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth clearly designed to obstruct, Sarah, with the unwavering support of Arthur Sterling's legal team, had finally secured all necessary permits. The defunct storefront had been transformed. Freshly painted walls in soothing blues and greens replaced the grimy yellow. Comfortable, donated furniture filled the waiting room, and two small, impeccably clean examination rooms gleamed with new equipment. It was humble, but it was warm, welcoming, and most importantly, open. The first few patients trickled in cautiously, drawn by word of mouth and the flyers Sarah had personally distributed in soup kitchens and shelters. They were weary faces, etched with the struggles of street life, but their eyes held a flicker of cautious hope. Sarah, in her crisp new scrubs, greeted each person with a genuine smile and a firm handshake. There was no intake paperwork that required a permanent address, no insurance card demanded, no judgment in her gaze, just care. A few months later, the Jenkins Initiative was a bustling hub of compassionate medicine. The small clinic was a testament to what could be achieved when bureaucracy was sidelined in favor of humanity. Vaccines were administered, minor injuries treated, chronic conditions managed, and connections to social services were established. It was a place where dignity was restored with every interaction. One brisk morning, as Sarah was reviewing patient charts, a familiar, slightly gravelly voice called her name. "Nurse Sarah," she looked up, a smile spreading across her face. It was George, the veteran from the overpass. His cough was gone, his eyes were clearer, and while the lines on his face remained, they seemed softened by a newfound ease. He wasn't there as a patient today. He was there as a volunteer, helping manage the front desk, guiding new arrivals with a gentle hand and a comforting word. "Got a full house today?" He chuckled, pointing to the small waiting room where a young mother was patiently awaiting a vaccination for her giggling baby. It was a testament to the clinic's impact, a cycle of care paying itself forward. The community had slowly begun to shift. Some of Brenda Vance's most vocal supporters had quietly started using the clinic's services or had seen the positive impact it had on the neighborhood. The undesirable elements Brenda had warned about were, in reality, just people, grateful for a warm place and a kind word. The predicted surge in crime never materialized. Instead, the area felt a little safer, a little more connected. Later that afternoon, as Sarah took a rare moment to collect her thoughts, she gazed out the clinic window. The sun, finally breaking through the clouds, cast a golden glow on the street. Across the street, a sleek, black sedan pulled up to a fancy new bistro. Mr. Davies, impeccably dressed as always, emerged from the driver's side, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression one of detached self-importance. He was meeting Dr. Morgan, who arrived moments later. They chatted briefly, then turned towards the bistro entrance. As Mr. Davies reached for the door handle, his eyes, almost by accident, swept across the street. They landed on the brightly painted facade of the Jenkins Initiative, then on Sarah, standing in the window. Their eyes met across the street, a vast chasm of vastly different worlds separating them. There was no exchange of words, no grand gesture. For a fleeting moment, Mr. Davies' meticulously composed face flickered. A hint of something unreadable, perhaps a sour, grudging acknowledgement, or a faint trace of bewildered recognition at her resilience. He quickly composed himself, his mask of corporate indifference firmly back in place. He gave no nod, offered no sign of concession. Sarah didn't scowl, didn't gloat, didn't feel the need for any outward vindication. The rage that had once burned so fiercely had matured into a quiet, unwavering resolve. Her victory wasn't in his defeat, but in her own profound, undeniable success. It was in the bustling clinic behind her, in George's cheerful greeting, in the happy gurgle of a healthy baby. She simply offered a small, knowing smile, a private acknowledgement of her journey. Then, she turned from the window, back to the waiting room, back to her patients, back to her purpose. The doors of the Jenkins Initiative were open, and the quiet revolution of compassion had truly begun.